I reached the facility a little before sunset. The drive had taken me far outside the city, into a long stretch of empty land that barely looked maintained. The road narrowed until it turned into gravel, and the building finally came into view on a lonely patch of ground. It was large enough to look important, but old enough to feel forgotten. Concrete walls streaked with rust, windows sealed shut with metal frames, a single security light flickering near the entrance like it was tired of trying. I pulled my bag from the car and walked toward the front door. There was no sign with a company name, just a keypad, a chipped metal frame, and a sticker that must have been peeled off years ago. It felt strange to start a job at a place that did not seem interested in being known. When I pressed the buzzer, the door clicked instantly, almost like someone had been standing on the other side, waiting for me. A man in a grey uniform opened the door. He looked older, maybe mid-50s, with deep lines around his eyes that made him look permanently tense. His badge said, "Harlan, you are the new night security," he said. It was not a question. I nodded. "Follow me." The way he spoke made it clear he had no interest in small talk. I stepped inside and felt the temperature drop sharply. The facility was colder than normal air conditioning. My breath did not fog, but the air felt still, heavy, like the building did not want movement inside it. We walked through a narrow hallway lined with fluorescent lights. Some flickered, others hummed faintly. The tiles under our shoes were old, but clean, as if someone scrubbed them obsessively every day. The deeper we went, the less outside noise I heard. Eventually, it felt like the entire building was swallowing sound. Harlan stopped at a small office with a desk, a stack of papers, and a single metal cabinet. "This is where you check in. This is where you check out. Nothing else in here concerns you." His voice was flat and controlled. He opened the drawer and pulled out a sealed envelope stamped with red ink. He held it like it weighed more than paper should. "These are the rules," he said. "You will read them before your shift begins. You will follow them exactly. You will not ask questions about them." I glanced at the envelope. There were 7 numbered points printed through the paper, faintly visible beneath the seal. "What kind of rules are these?" I asked. Harlan stared at me like he had been expecting the question but wished I had not asked it. "They are not suggestions," he said quietly. "They keep you alive." He handed the envelope to me. His fingers were trembling. That detail bothered me more than his words. "This way," he said, turning again. We walked farther down the main corridor. The deeper we went, the more the building changed. The hallways split in straight lines like a maze built by someone who loved symmetry. Each wing looked identical. Same lights, same doors, same walls. I tried to memorize the route, but after 3 turns, I could not tell which direction we came from. I felt the urge to check behind me. Something about the silence made the hairs on my neck rise. It felt like the building was watching the way a person watches movement in the dark, waiting for the shape to reveal itself. Harlan led me into the monitoring room. Rows of screens covered the wall, each showing a camera feed from a different hallway or storage room. Some flickered. Others had static in the corners like old tape recordings. The air in the room smelled faintly like metal. "This is where you spend most of the shift," Harlan said. "Walk the routes when the schedule says to. Never shorten them. Never skip them." He paused, then said something that did not sit well with me. "And never stay in one hallway longer than needed." Why not? Because the building does not like stillness. He realized what he had said and stiffened. "Forget that. Follow the rules. That is all." Before I could ask anything else, another man entered the room. He looked younger, maybe early 30s, with dark circles under his eyes that made him look like he had not slept in days. This must have been the previous night guard. The man gave me a brief nod but would not meet my eyes. "Shift change," Harlan said. "Hand it over." The man set his radio on the desk, then leaned close to me. His voice was low enough that Harlan could not hear. "Do not break Rule 4, he whispered. "Whatever happens, no matter what you see, no matter what you hear, do not break that one." Before I could ask what Rule 4 was, Harlan cleared his throat sharply. The man backed away and walked out fast, like he could not wait to leave the building. I looked at Harlan. "Why is Rule 4 so important?" He shut the question down with a glare. "Read the envelope. Learn the routine. Keep the cameras on. Keep the lights on. Do not wander into the wrong hallway. And stay alert." I opened the envelope with stiff fingers. The paper inside was crisp and new. The rules were short, simple, but deeply unsettling. Rule 1. When the power flickers, stand still until it stabilizes. Do not move. Rule 2. If you hear your name spoken from behind you, do not respond. Continue your duties without turning. Rule 3. If any shadow does not match its source, keep walking. Do not pause. Rule 4. After 2 a.m., do not look at reflective surfaces. This includes windows, screens, or polished floors. Rule 5. If a door is open that should be closed, shut it immediately. If it closes on its own, leave it alone. Rule 6. If any staff member disappears during your shift, do not investigate. Rule 7. If you hear tapping from the third hallway, do not approach. Change your route. I reread the list. None of these sounded like normal security instructions. They sounded like warnings written by someone who had seen something they could not fully understand. Are you sure this is necessary? I asked. Harlan did not speak for a long moment. Then he said, yes. Every rule exists because someone ignored it. The room felt colder again. Your shift starts in 10 minutes, he said. Get familiar with the monitors. I will leave once you begin. He walked out without another word. I stared at the screens. Every hallway looked empty. Every room looked silent. Yet the air felt charged, like the building was waiting for me to make the first mistake. I folded the rules and placed them in my pocket. The paper felt warm compared to the room. The speaker on the desk crackled softly as the clock hit the start of my shift. I sat in the chair, straightened myself, and glanced once more at the dark hallways on the screens. That moment was the first time I felt something inside the building shift, a faint vibration beneath the floor, a sense of movement behind the walls, like the facility had taken a slow breath as the sun finally slipped away. My first night here had begun, and I had no idea the rules were not meant to prepare me. They were meant to warn me. The first hour of my shift moved slower than anything I had experienced in a job. The building stayed unnaturally calm, as if every hallway were holding its breath. The screens showed nothing out of place. No movement, no activity, just long stretches of empty corridors lit by harsh white lights that made everything look sterile and abandoned. I tried to settle in, but the tension in my stomach refused to loosen. My eyes kept drifting toward the clock above the monitors. I knew my first route walk was coming up. At midnight sharp, I had to begin the rotation. The paper attached to the wall showed the path. A straight loop, simple, direct, just long enough to patrol every main section. It should have been easy. It should have felt routine. But with those 7 rules in my pocket, nothing felt routine. 5 minutes before midnight, the lights flickered, only for a second. Just a small dip in brightness, followed by a quick return. I froze in my chair, remembering Rule 1, stand still, do not move. The light steadied. I exhaled slowly and brushed my palms along my pants. My skin felt colder than it should. The flicker had not been strong, but it carried a strange weight. A feeling like something had passed through the building, something large and unseen. When the clock struck midnight, an alarm on the desk gave a short, soft pulse, signaling the start of the rotation. I took the flashlight, clipped the radio to my chest, and stepped into the corridor. The moment I crossed into the main hallway, I felt the temperature shift again. The air seemed heavier in here, almost damp. The lights stretched down the long corridor in pale blocks, each one flickering at slightly different rhythms. My footsteps echoed more than they should have. It sounded like the building was empty for miles. The first section of the route was straightforward, a long passage that branched into 2 wings. The left wing led toward storage rooms. The right wing led toward the laboratories. The third hallway was farther down to the left, marked only by a metal sign bolted to the wall. I was not supposed to look into it. Not after 2 a.m., but even now, just knowing it was there made my stomach clench. Halfway down the main corridor, I heard a faint clicking sound from somewhere ahead, a sharp metallic tick, almost like a door latch slowly shifting. I paused. The rule about abnormal noises sat heavy in my mind. Even though the rules did not mention clicking, I told myself the sound was nothing. Old buildings settle, metal contracts at night. I forced myself to walk, but the clicking came again, louder this time. I turned the corner into the storage wing and scanned the hall. Nothing. All the doors were shut. The lights stayed steady. I checked the locks out of habit. Every door was sealed tight. Not one was open or loose. Not one moved. The clicking stopped as soon as I reached the third door on the left. That door led to a room labeled Equipment Archive B. I placed my hand on the handle. It was cold enough to sting my skin. I pulled my hand back and swallowed a breath, trying to steady myself. Rule 5 flickered through my mind. If a door is open that should be closed, shut it immediately. If it closes on its own, leave it alone. This one was shut, tight, locked. But something about the silence behind it made my chest tighten. It felt like the room was aware that I was standing outside it. I backed away slowly. My footsteps echoed through the empty hall as I continued the route. At the far end of the wing, the lights dimmed for a moment. Not a full flicker, just a soft dip, enough to force me to pause and stay still the way Rule 1 required. When the brightness returned, I walked again, but my nerves were sharper. The building felt unpredictable, almost alive. I reached the point where the first wing connected back to the main corridor. The long hallway stretched forward like a tunnel that had no end. Somewhere in the distance, the third hallway waited on the left side. I could not see it from here, but I felt it. A quiet pressure in the air, a heaviness that seemed to leak from one point along the wall. I tried to focus. Stay calm. Walk the route. Follow the rules. Halfway down the main corridor, something shifted in my peripheral vision. A shape, tall, thin, still. I turned too fast and nothing was there. Just the long corridor with its straight angles and flickering lights. The shape had been near the wall, slightly darker than the shadows, slightly taller than a person. I forced myself to walk. My heart was moving faster now. Every step felt heavier. As I approached the area near the third hallway, the air got noticeably colder. The contrast was sharp enough that I stopped walking for a moment. I rubbed my hands together, trying to warm my fingers. The hallway ahead seemed darker than the others. It was not a trick of the lights. It was the space itself. The third hallway entrance came into view around the corner. It was just a normal corridor at first glance, a plain rectangular entrance with lights stretching down an empty path. But something was off. The shadows at the far end did not match the overhead lights. The lights shone downward in clear lines. The shadows on the floor stretched sideways at an angle that made no sense. Rule 3 flashed through my mind. If any shadow does not match its source, keep walking. Do not pause. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to stare at it, to try and understand it, to see if it was a trick or a malfunction. But the rule was clear. Do not pause. I kept moving. My steps stayed steady, but my breathing did not. I passed the third hallway without turning my head. I did not dare break the rule. The cold air wrapped around my spine, as if something was standing just inside that corridor, waiting, watching. When I reached the far end of the main hall and turned into the right wing, the tension eased a little. The lights here were brighter. The temperature was warmer. The air did not feel suffocating. I let myself breathe normally, but the relief did not last. As I reached the midpoint of the right wing, I noticed another irregularity. Something small, almost hidden. The vent grate on the wall was vibrating, a low, steady pulse, as if something inside the vent was moving. Not crawling, not scratching, just shifting. Slow, methodical. I stepped closer and the vibration stopped instantly. The silence that followed felt thick and unnatural. I backed away until I reached the opposite wall. My hand brushed against the radio clipped to my chest. I thought about calling Harlan or the supervisor, but Rule 6 echoed in my mind. If any staff member disappears during your shift, do not investigate. The rules made one thing clear. If something strange happened, I was on my own. The vibration in the vent started again. This time slightly louder. I stepped away fast and continued my rotation. I forced myself not to look back. By the time I returned to the monitoring room, my shirt stuck damp against my back. I had never felt the weight of silence so strongly in any job before. I sat down at the main desk and let the chair carry my weight. I checked the screens. Nothing moved. No doors open. No shadows shifting. The building looked calm again. But I knew the truth. The calm meant nothing. It was the stillness that felt dangerous. The rules existed for reasons that were never explained. Now I had experienced the first taste of whatever lived behind them. My first rotation was complete. My nerves were not. Something had changed in the building during that walk. Something subtle, something quiet. And I felt it watching me from somewhere just outside the reach of the cameras. I stayed in the monitoring room until the end of the shift. The screens stayed quiet, but something about the silence felt unnatural, almost forced. Every minute that passed felt stretched thin, like the building was waiting for the night to finish. When the clock finally approached sunrise, The overhead lights brightened by a few degrees. The system did that automatically at the end of every night shift, but the faint change felt like a breath being released. I shut down the patrol logs, checked the cameras one last time, and gathered my things. My head felt tight. I kept replaying the shadows in the third hallway, the vent vibration, the shape I thought I saw. Small moments, all separate, but they carried a pattern I did not understand. At 6 sharp, the door near the end of the corridor opened, and the day staff entered. 3 people walked in. All of them looked exhausted. Not the kind of tired that comes from working long hours, but the kind that comes from living with fear every day. Their faces looked drained. Their eyes were dull. Their shoulders slumped like gravity pulled harder on them than everyone else. The man leading the group was the technician I had briefly seen on my first day. His name tag said Jensen. He carried a clipboard and walked quickly, almost urgently. "You made it through your first night," he said, stopping at the doorway. I nodded, unsure how to respond. He glanced around the room, checking the screens and the equipment in stiff, deliberate motions. His hands trembled when he adjusted one of the monitors. "Did anything happen?" he asked quietly. Before I could answer, another staff member behind him shook her head sharply and stepped up beside him. She put a hand on his arm as if to silence him. "Don't ask him that," she said. Her voice was soft but tense. "He's new. Let him adjust." Jensen looked conflicted. He hesitated, then stepped closer to me anyway. "If you hear tapping," he whispered, "never go to it. I don't care what time it is or what the route says. Rule 7 is not strict enough. It moves." The woman grabbed his arm and pulled him back with a firm grip. "That is enough," she said. Her voice remained calm, but her jaw was tight. "We do not scare the new hires. That only makes things worse." "It is better if he knows," Jensen insisted. "And it is better if you stay employed," the woman replied. He fell silent immediately. Before I could speak, another figure entered the room, the supervisor, the same one from my interview. His presence changed the entire energy in the room. Everyone stiffened. The tension was sudden and sharp, like a string pulled too tight. The supervisor's eyes swept across us with quiet suspicion. He looked at Jensen, then at the woman, then finally at me. "Shift is over," he said. "Go home." His tone carried no room for conversation, no opening for questions, no explanation, just an order. I gathered my bag and stepped into the hallway. The day staff followed behind me. They moved quickly, eager to get away from the supervisor's shadow. Once we were far enough down the corridor, Jensen leaned close again. "You should know something," he whispered. "Those rules were not written by the administration." The woman shot him a warning look, but he continued anyway. "They were written by the ones who survived." He looked at me with a kind of desperation in his eyes, especially Rule 4, "Do not break that one." The woman grabbed him by the shoulder and pulled him back. "Harder this time." "Stop talking," she hissed. "You want him to quit on his second day? You want him to panic? Because that is what happens when you tell them too much too fast." Jensen lowered his eyes. His mouth tightened. He did not answer her, but the frustration in his expression said enough. Another staff member, a man who had not spoken at all, moved closer to me. He looked younger than the others, maybe early 20s. His skin was pale and his eyes were sunken. "You will see things here," he said quietly. "Just remember the rules are not random. Every one of them was made after someone broke it. That is all I can tell you." The woman snapped at him too. "No more warnings," she said. "Enough." She stepped in front of all of them and faced me. "This job is simple if you follow the routine," she said, "and dangerous if you start imagining things that are not there. Go home, sleep, clear your head. You will understand more with time." Her voice sounded rehearsed, like she had said that same line to many people before me, people who likely did not last long. I nodded because I did not know what else to do. We walked toward the lobby. The closer we got to the exit, the lighter the air felt. The pressure in my chest eased. The shadows felt normal again. The coldness faded. It was strange. The moment sunlight touched the windows near the entrance, the building's atmosphere loosened as if it lost interest in us. When we stepped outside, the warm morning air hit my face like a shock. I had not realized how cold the facility was until now. The day staff split off toward the parking lot. The younger man who had spoken to me gave a small wave before heading to his car. Jensen looked like he wanted to say more, but the woman's glare kept him quiet. The supervisor stood near the doorway with his arms crossed. He watched us leave without blinking. The expression on his face was not annoyance or disapproval. It was fear, Fear of us talking. Fear of what we might say. Fear of what might follow us out. He waited until every one of us reached the parking lot before closing the door behind him with a metallic thud. I started my car and sat in the driver's seat for a moment. I felt drained. My mind kept circling back to Jensen's warning, do not break Rule 4. His urgency felt real, too real to ignore. As I drove away from the facility, the building shrank in my rearview mirror, a plain grey structure sitting alone on miles of quiet land. No sign, no markings, no name. But the longer I stared at it, the more I felt like the place was watching me leave. I tried to shake off the tension. I told myself this was just a job. A strange one, yes, but a job. I needed the money. I needed stability. I could handle a few odd rules, but once I reached home, I realized how wrong I was. Sleep would not come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the angled shadows in the third hallway. The vibration in the vent, the clicking door handle, the way the building felt like it was breathing in the night. I lay awake for hours. The rules were not designed to inform me. They were designed to protect me, and the staff warnings were not meant to scare me. They were meant to prepare me. My next shift would begin that night, and something inside the facility already knew I was coming back. I returned to the facility a little before sunset. The sky was a soft orange fading into blue, and for a moment the world looked normal, peaceful, almost comforting. But the moment the building came into view, that comfort drained from my chest. The facility looked darker in the fading light, more silent, more aware. I parked my car and stepped out slowly, feeling the cold air settle around me. I half expected someone to greet me or check in with me, but the exterior was empty. No supervisor, no staff ending their shift, no movement behind the windows. It was as if the building did not need people to function, as if it preferred the quiet. When I walked inside, the door clicked shut behind me with the same precision as the night before. The lobby was empty. The lights hummed faintly, but the air felt thicker. It clung to my skin like a thin film. I passed down the main hall toward the monitoring room, trying to steady my breathing. Harlan was waiting inside. He looked even more exhausted than yesterday. Pale skin, heavy eyes, faint shaking in his hands. "You are on time," he said without emotion. "Everything all right?" I asked. He ignored the question. "Read the rules again before the shift starts. Read them every night. Do not rely on memory. Memory plays tricks in this place." That was all he said before brushing past me and walking toward the exit. His footsteps sounded hurried, almost desperate. He left the building faster than any person I had ever seen finish a job. When the door closed behind him, the silence deepened. A pressing emptiness filled the room. I sat at the desk and unfolded the rules. My eyes moved over each line. I read them once, then again, then a third time, slower than before. The words felt heavier today, more threatening, especially Rule 4, especially the warning about the mirrors and screens. The clock hit the top of the hour. My shift began. The cameras flickered as if reacting to the change. Not a full glitch, just a quick distortion across several screens at once, like static rippling across old film. I leaned closer to examine them. That was when I saw it. A dark shape in the third hallway camera. It stood at the far end, tall, still, almost human but not quite. I blinked and the shape vanished. The hallway appeared empty again. I checked the other angles. Nothing, no movement, no distortion, just silence. A shiver ran down my spine. My first patrol was scheduled in 30 minutes. I stared at the screen where the shadow had appeared, waiting to see if it returned. The hallway remained empty, cold, lifeless. When the time came, I took the flashlight and stepped into the corridor. The shift in temperature was immediate. The hallway outside the monitoring room felt colder than before, as if the building had been waiting for me to open the door. The lights hummed with a low vibration I could feel in my shoulders. I started down the main hall. My footsteps felt too loud. Every step carried a sharp echo that traveled farther than it should. The silence between each step felt stretched and unnatural. I passed the storage wing entrance. The clicking sound from yesterday did not return, but the air near the door was colder. I did not stop. I kept moving, following the path exactly as written. As I turned into the main corridor, the atmosphere changed again. The air felt heavy. The shadows looked longer. The lights flickered in a slow, rhythmic pattern that made the walls seem to pulse. I felt watched, not from a specific point, but from everywhere. From the ceiling, from the vents, from the corners where the light did not reach fully. I took another step and froze. The shadow on the wall to my right moved. It stretched upward, bending in a slow ripple that did not match my motion. My body stayed still, but the shadow slid along the wall as if alive. Its head tilted the wrong way. Its arms hung at angles that defied anatomy. Rule 3 hit my mind with sharp urgency. If any shadow does not match its source, keep walking. Do not pause. I stepped forward. My legs felt heavy and unsteady, but I forced them to move. The shadow continued sliding along the wall beside me, drifting like smoke. I kept my eyes forward, refusing to look at it directly. Halfway past it, the shadow seemed to lengthen. I heard nothing, but I could feel something close to my left shoulder, a coldness that tightened my jaw, a pressure that made my teeth ache. I wanted to run. My instincts screamed to sprint, but the rule said to walk, so I walked. The shadow stopped moving only when I reached the far end of the hall. I did not look back. I could not. When I turned the corner toward the laboratory wing, the temperature rose again. My breathing steadied. My chest loosened enough to pull in a full breath. But relief did not fully reach me. My body remained tense. My nerves stayed sharp. I checked the doors. All of them were closed tightly. The vent in this wing was silent. No pulsing, no vibration, no movement. But halfway down the hallway, I found something new. A faint smear on the wall. Dark, thin, almost like a shadow stain if such a thing existed. I brushed the surface with my fingers. The smear felt cold, even colder than the concrete around it. The chill ran up my hand and into my wrist. The smear looked like something had pressed against the wall with weight. Something tall, something with long limbs, something that dragged itself forward. I stepped back. The smear continued down the hall, thin streaks running along the surface, disappearing around the corner ahead. My route did not require following it, so I did not. I kept walking, trying to ignore the sense that whatever made those marks had been moving recently. When I completed the rotation, I returned to the monitoring room and sat at the desk. My chest felt tight. My hands shook faintly. The screens flickered again as I sat down. This time, the distortion lasted longer. The third hallway camera glitched in and out for almost 10 seconds. The shape appeared again at the far end, still, watching. Its outline was wrong. Too tall, too narrow, too stiff. When the glitch cleared, the shape remained, then vanished suddenly, as if pulled backward out of view. I sat frozen in the chair. The air in the monitoring room grew colder. The lights above me buzzed in a low vibration that felt almost alive. I checked the hallway outside through the window. Nothing moved, but I could feel something shifting inside the building. Something slow and deliberate. Something aware of me. I leaned back in the chair and tried to steady my breathing. I closed my eyes for a moment, but the image of the shadow sliding along the wall stayed burned behind my eyelids. There was no denying it anymore. The rules were not warnings about rare events. They were warnings about the building itself. I returned my attention to the screens. The hallways looked empty. The vents looked still. The third hallway looked quiet. But I sensed something waiting just beyond the camera's view. Something learning, something adjusting, something that had noticed I followed the rules, and it would try again. I began my second rotation after a short break in the monitoring room. The building had settled into an even heavier silence. The lights felt dimmer than before, and the air carried a chill that seeped into my skin. Every part of the facility felt different tonight. More awake, more aware, like it had been studying me during my first patrol. I stood up, stretched my arms, and grabbed the flashlight. My fingers were stiff from tension. I opened the door and stepped back into the main corridor. The temperature shifted the moment I crossed the threshold. The cold wrapped around me in a slow tightening grip. It felt like stepping into a different world. The lights overhead buzzed with a weak pulse as I walked. Each flicker made my heartbeat jump. The first part of the route was uneventful. Long hallways, silent vents, closed doors. But the deeper I went into the left wing, the heavier the air grew. As I approached the third door in the storage section, my breath caught in my throat. The door that had been locked last night was open, not wide, just enough to show a thin strip of darkness inside the room. A narrow gap, steady and silent. The air leaking from the opening felt colder than the hallway, sharp and metallic. Rule 5 hit me instantly. If a door is open that should be closed, shut it immediately. My heart raced as I stepped closer. The handle was stiff in my hand. Even touching it made my fingers ache. The darkness inside the room did not look natural. It felt thick, like a heavy fog made of shadows. I pushed the door slowly. The hinges groaned softly, resisting the motion. The door closed inch by inch, and as it did, I felt pressure build behind it, like something was pressing from the inside, something patient. The second the latch clicked, the lights in the hallway flickered. A single long flicker that dimmed everything. I froze. Rule 1 demanded stillness. I stood motionless until the brightness returned. My breath stayed locked in my chest. Then a sound came from behind the newly closed door. A slow creaking, moving downward, almost like footsteps settling onto the floor. The rules did not say what to do if something moved inside the room after closing it. So I continued the route. My legs felt stiff, but I forced them to walk. Halfway down the corridor, the air thickened again. I heard a soft tapping sound behind me, not the tapping from the third hallway. This tapping was faint and irregular, like a finger touching glass from the inside. I quickened my pace without looking back. When I turned the corner into the main corridor, the tapping stopped. The third hallway waited on my left, silent and cold. The lights near it flickered with a slower rhythm than the rest of the building. The darkness at the far end looked deeper than last night. I felt the same pressure in the air, a weight pushing against my chest. I stayed focused on the main path and kept walking. My flashlight beam slid across the walls, catching nothing unusual at first. Then something caught my eye. Farther down the hall, a door stood half open. This time the door was not in the storage wing. It was one of the facility's interior research rooms, a place I had not yet seen open. My stomach tightened again. Rule 5. If a door is open that should be closed, shut it immediately. I approached slowly. The light coming from inside the room flickered weakly. The air around the opening felt colder. A draft pushed outward in shallow waves. When I reached the doorway, I realized the room lights were not flickering. The flicker was coming from a monitor inside, an old screen on a metal desk. The monitor glowed dimly, showing static. It pulsed with a soft rhythm. The door was heavy when I pushed it. The hinges groaned louder this time. The noise traveled down the empty hallway like a warning. Just before the door shut completely, I felt something shift in the air. A cold gust brushed my cheek, not from the hallway, but from inside the room. It felt deliberate, almost intentional. The hair on my arms rose instantly. The door clicked shut, and then it creaked open again, not slowly, not lightly, suddenly, as if a force on the inside pulled it. My heart slammed against my ribs. Rule 5 was clear. If it closes on its own, leave it alone. If it opens on its own, close it. But what about a door that did both? I took a step back. Something inside the room felt wrong. The air pressing through the open gap felt sharp and cold. A faint static buzz leaked from the monitor beyond the doorway. I reached out and pushed the door again. The pressure behind it felt stronger. The door resisted more than before. When it latched, I held my breath, waiting to see if it moved again. The hallway went dead quiet. 5 seconds passed, then 10, then 15. I turned away slowly. 2 steps later, the door behind me slammed shut with a violent force that made the wall vibrate. My heart skipped. I did not look back. Rule 5 gave me no instructions for this. I chose to keep walking. My breathing stayed unsteady as I reached the far end of the hallway. The lights brightened slightly in this area, giving me a small sense of relief. But the relief vanished when my radio crackled sharply. Just a burst of static. Then a faint voice, too faint to understand, but it sounded like it was inside the vent above me. Not from the radio speaker. I lifted the device closer to my ear. The static continued in small bursts. Then the faint voice again, closer this time. Not speaking words, just breathing, slow and uneven. I switched the channel, thinking it was a malfunction. The breathing followed. At the same rhythm, at the same volume, I lowered the radio. The breathing did not stop. It grew louder for one moment, then faded suddenly, leaving a cold emptiness in the hall. A shiver crawled down my spine. I remembered Rule 2. If you hear your name spoken from behind you, do not respond. This was not my name, but it felt like a test, something trying to see what I would do. I ignored the radio and continued the route. My final pass took me down the corridor toward the monitoring room. The hallway looked normal at first, but when I passed one of the glass observation windows, something made me stop. My reflection, but only my reflection. There was no light behind me, no movement behind me, no shape behind me, yet my reflection stepped out of sync, just a fraction of a second, barely noticeable. But real Rule 4 forbade reflections only after 2 a.m. It was not 2 a.m. yet. but the sight still pushed a cold spike into my chest. I lowered my head and walked fast. When I reached the monitoring room, I shut the door behind me with a shaky breath. I sat down at the desk and felt my heartbeat pounding at my throat. The cameras flickered again, not randomly, all at once. For 3 full seconds, the building went dark on every monitor. Then the screens lit up again. Every hallway was empty. Every door was closed. But I knew that was a lie. I knew the rules were not breaking. Something inside the building was breaking them for me. The rest of the night crawled by in a heavy, suffocating silence. I stayed in the monitoring room, staring at the screens, waiting for something else to move. Every hour felt longer than the one before. The fluorescent lights buzzed with a slow pulse, and the air felt colder as the night reached its deepest point. Nothing happened for a while. No doors moving, no shadows shifting, no strange shapes on the monitors. The quiet made me more anxious than activity ever could. It felt like the building was watching me rest, waiting for the right moment to test another rule. When the clock finally hit the end of my shift, the relief came slow. I gathered my things and stepped into the hallway. My legs felt heavy, my chest felt tight. The silence followed me all the way toward the lobby. For a moment, I thought the day staff might not show up at all. Then the door at the end of the corridor opened. 3 workers stepped inside, but something was wrong the moment they entered. Their faces looked drained, their expressions dull. They seemed even more tired than yesterday, as if the daylight hours offered no rest for them. The supervisor followed behind them, and the moment I saw him, I knew something was different. He looked broken. His uniform was wrinkled. His eyes were bloodshot. His hands shook as he tried to button his sleeve, missing the clasp twice before stopping. His breathing was shallow. His gaze kept drifting toward the floor like he was afraid to look up. He walked toward me with slow, unsteady steps. "You finished the rotation," he said quietly. I nodded. "What happened?" I asked. He shook his head slowly. "You do not ask questions," he whispered. "Questions lead to curiosity. Curiosity leads to mistakes. Mistakes lead to new rules." His voice cracked on the last word. Behind him, the day staff avoided looking at either of us. One of them walked straight toward the break room without a word. Another stood by the wall, staring at the floor, gripping a clipboard so tightly the plastic bent. The third one kept glancing at the exits, as if he expected something to follow them inside. The supervisor tried to steady himself, but the tremor in his hands grew stronger. "You followed the rules tonight," he said. "That is good. That keeps you safe." His tone shifted suddenly. Faster, more agitated. "But the rules are not enough. They are never enough." His voice rose, cracking again. "They change. They always change. They do not warn us when they change. They do not tell us what is different. We learn only when someone dies." He swallowed hard and leaned against the wall for support. I stepped back slightly. "What changed?" I asked before I could stop myself. He lifted his head with a sharp glare, his eyes wide and frightened. "Do not ask that," he whispered harshly. "The building listens. It listens when you talk about it. It listens when you question it. It listens when you doubt the rules." His breath grew uneven again. He pressed a hand to his forehead. "You saw something last night," he said. "I can tell from your face. You saw the shadow, or the door, or the vent." I did not answer. I did not need to. He gave a small, broken laugh. "We all see things. That is why the rules exist. Every rule was made after someone met the wrong thing at the wrong time." One of the day staff stepped forward, a tall man with a shaved head and tired eyes. "Stop talking," he said firmly. "You need rest." The supervisor ignored him. He looked at me and lowered his voice again. "Rule 2 was added after we heard something learning human voices," he said. "It started with whispers. Then it said names. Then it said sentences, full sentences. Mimicked people perfectly, used their tones, their breathing, their pauses." He shuddered, gripping the wall harder. "One guard answered it. He thought it was me calling him. When we found his radio, it was crushed, bent like metal folded by something with too many fingers. The day staff grabbed his arms and tried to pull him away. 'That is enough,' one of them snapped. 'You cannot tell him these things. He is new. He will leave. He should leave.' The supervisor fired back, voice shaking. 'He should run. We all should.' His knees buckled slightly, and they caught him under the arms. He looked at me again, his eyes wide with panic. 'You will see more,' he said. You think the shadows are the worst part. They are not. The reflections are worse. The voices are worse. The third hallway is the worst of all. He tried to step toward me, but the staff held him firmly. Do not break Rule 4, he whispered. Do not look into anything that shows your image after 2 in the morning. Not the screens, not the windows, not the metal, not even your own eyes if the light's dim. That rule was written in blood. The woman from yesterday pulled him back and started guiding him toward the exit. Go home, she said to me without turning. Do not think about what he said. Do not let it sink in. Just sleep. Rest. Do not imagine things that are not there. But I could tell from her voice that she did not believe her own words. They dragged the supervisor down the hallway. His legs shook with each step. His murmuring voice echoed faintly as he was taken away. They change the rules every time something evolves, he whispered. Every time something learns. Every time it finds a new way to reach us. His words faded as they pulled him around the corner and out of sight. The hallway fell silent. I stood alone, feeling the cold air wrap around me again. The building hummed faintly, a deep, low vibration that pulsed through the walls like a heartbeat. I left the facility quickly, faster than usual. The morning air outside felt warm against my skin, and for a moment I felt like I could breathe again. But the supervisor's words followed me into the parking lot. They lingered in my mind with a weight I could not shake. The rules were never enough. They were created after someone suffered. They were warnings written by survivors. And something inside the building was learning. My next shift started in 12 hours. I could already feel the building waiting for me. The drive back to the facility felt heavier than the night before. The supervisor's breakdown replayed in my mind again and again. His trembling hands, his wide eyes, the way his voice cracked when he said the rules were never enough. None of it felt exaggerated. None of it felt like stress or paranoia. It felt like a warning carved from experience. When the facility came into view, it looked darker than usual. The sun had just dropped, leaving a washed-out blue sky above the concrete structure. The building stood in silence, waiting. The moment I stepped inside, the air closed in around me like a cold grip. The monitoring room lights were already on. The screens flickered with their usual static at the edges. Nothing moved in any hallway. The vents looked still. The doors were all closed. It almost looked peaceful. But the supervisor's words kept circling in my head. They evolve. They change. They learn. I clocked in and sat down, adjusting the chair slightly. I could feel the building humming faintly through the floor. Not loud, not shaking, just a pulse, a slow rhythm. Too steady, almost intentional. 30 minutes into the shift, I noticed the cameras were flickering more than usual. A soft static wave washed across several screens in intervals. I checked the wiring. Everything looked normal. No loose cables. No power issues. I watched carefully as the main corridor feed glitched again. The image froze for half a second, then resumed. That was unusual. The glitches were normally fast, barely noticeable. This felt like the system was struggling to keep up with something it did not want to show. I leaned closer. That was when the motion sensor on the west wing blinked. A staff member was doing cleaning rounds. A janitor, someone I had never seen before. Older man, thin frame, grey uniform. He walked slowly down the hall, pushing a mop bucket. I watched him move toward the middle camera. Everything looked normal. His steps echoed faintly through the audio feed. He reached the third door on the left and paused to wipe the doorknob. Then the screen flickered, just once. A single static break. When the feed returned, the janitor was gone. The mop stood upright in the center of the hallway, perfectly still, balanced without falling. My breath caught. I checked the next camera. Down the hall, nothing. I checked the previous camera. Nothing. I checked the overhead camera for that section. Nothing. The mop stayed upright, motionless. The janitor was gone. Rule 6 hit my mind with sharp clarity. If any staff member disappears during your shift, do not investigate. I stared at the screen, frozen. My instinct said to call someone, to alert the supervisor, to check the hallway physically. Anything but sitting and watching a mop stand in the middle of an empty corridor. But the rule was clear. Do not investigate. I forced myself to stay. Seated, the mop tipped suddenly and fell onto the floor. With a soft echo, a shape formed. Behind where it had stood, tall, thin, barely visible at first, a shadow that stretched upward like a column. It pressed against the wall for a moment before dissolving into the corner where the camera could not reach. My throat tightened. I looked at every camera that covered connecting hallways. They were all empty, but the shadow had moved. It had shifted out of frame. It had chosen a blind spot. The lights in the monitoring room flickered slightly, just enough for the temperature to drop. I rubbed my arms and leaned closer to the desk. My radio crackled. Not a voice, just faint static. Then a soft whisper of air like someone breathing near the speaker. I lowered the volume. I pulled the rules from my pocket and read Rule 6 again, just to reassure myself. Do not investigate. Do not get up. Do not step into that hallway. 20 minutes passed. The cameras showed nothing. The mop still lay on the ground. That detail felt worse than if it had vanished. At least vanishing made unclear sense. What I saw now was deliberate, as if something had placed it there and left it, like a marker, a sign. The hairs on my arms stayed raised. My chest felt tight. I could feel the building listening. The walls felt too still, too controlled. The longer I sat, the more I felt the facility breathing in its silent way. Then something else happened. The third hallway camera glitched again. A dark shape appeared. Not the same one from before. This one moved. A slow, sliding movement along the far end of the corridor. A long, unnatural glide, not walking, not stepping, more like drifting across the floor. I watched it freeze mid-glide. Then the lights flickered across the entire facility, twice, slow and heavy. I froze in place, obeying Rule 1. When the lights steadied, the third hallway was empty again. The shape was gone. The next 30 minutes dragged by as I monitored every camera with full tension in my jaw and chest. Nothing else moved. No more shadows. No more flickers. No more motion sensors. But the silence felt wrong. A different kind of wrong than usual. Almost like the building was waiting for me to stand up, as if it wanted to see what I would do without guidance. When the shift was halfway done, I finally allowed myself a slow breath. That was when I saw it. The camera feed for the janitorial wing flickered violently. Static burst across the screen, then cleared. The hallway was empty, but something else was now visible, in the corner, near the far wall, barely visible but unmistakable. A handprint, fresh, long, smudged across the wall at shoulder height, except the fingers were too long, the distance between them too wide. The hand was larger than any human hand should be. My spine tightened. Another static burst hit the screen. When the image settled, the handprint was gone. The hallway was spotless. I sat completely still for a long moment. The rules had not mentioned this, but I understood something now. The building never showed the full event. It only showed the aftermath, only enough to warn, only enough to remind me that something else was inside with me. It had taken the janitor. It had left a sign, and then it had erased the evidence. The rules had saved me from walking into that hallway, but they could not save the janitor. I leaned back slowly, breathing through the tightness in my chest. The cameras calmed again. The lights steadied. The air returned to its cold, heavy silence, but the facility no longer felt like a place. Guarded by rules, it felt like a predator that had learned how to keep me sitting in the chair, watching, waiting, obeying. The building wanted something from me. I could feel that now, and whatever took the janitor had not left. It was somewhere in the blind spots, somewhere just outside the camera's view, somewhere listening to my breathing. Midnight arrived quietly, too quietly. The first half of my shift had stretched into a long coil of tension, and the air inside the facility felt colder than any night before. I sat in the monitoring room, staring at the screens with the kind of focus that comes only from fear. My breathing stayed controlled, my hands stayed still, but my body remained locked in a state of alertness. The mop still lay on the floor in the janitorial wing. The handprint was gone. Every camera showed empty halls, motionless vents, closed doors. Nothing moved. Nothing flickered. But I had learned by now that the building's silence was never honest. 10 minutes after midnight, the lights dimmed. Not a flicker, not a pulse, a deep, heavy dim that lasted several seconds. I froze, obeying Rule 1. My muscles locked. My breathing slowed. I kept my body perfectly still, waiting for the lights to stabilize. A faint click echoed somewhere inside the walls. Another click followed from farther down. Then another. 3 clicks. 3 separate locations. Almost like something moving from one section of the building to the next. The lights steadied. I waited a few seconds before moving again, my hands shaking now. I pushed the tension back into my chest and leaned closer to the monitors. They were all blank. Every camera feed had gone black at the same time. A few seconds passed. The screens flickered. Then the image returned in fragments. Static. Lines of distortion. Frozen frames. The cameras were struggling to show anything at all. I tapped the side of the main console, but the equipment worked perfectly. The issue was not with the system. Something had interfered with the power. Something that could move through the building like a cold wave. A low vibration entered the floor beneath my chair. Slow, rhythmic, the kind of vibration you feel in your bones. I held my breath and waited for it to stop. When it did, the emergency lights above me flicked on. A deep red glow filled the hallway outside the monitoring room window. The emergency system only activated in full power failures, which meant the main power had not flickered. It had been cut. I stood up slowly and stepped toward the window. The hallway looked unfamiliar in red light. Every edge sharpened, every corner darkened, every surface looked wet and cold. The shadows stretched unnaturally far, merging with one another until the entire corridor looked like a long throat swallowing its own light. My radio crackled with a low hum, no voice. Just a deep, droning hum that moved through the static like something breathing through the speaker. I lowered the volume again. There was nothing useful there. I looked back at the screens. Some feeds had returned, others stayed black. The third hallway camera flickered hardest. Lines shook across the screen. The static rippled like a heartbeat. For a moment it looked like something was crawling across the lens, but the distortion cleared before I could focus on it. I rubbed my hands together, trying to fight the cold. The emergency lights changed the feel of everything. The building seemed closer, smaller, more alive. The ventilation system let out a faint metal groan above. Me. Another groan traveled down the hall. A third groan answered. It from deeper inside the facility. 3 again, tried to steady my breathing. I had no rule for this. No guidance on what to do if the entire building shifted like a living creature. I checked the rule sheet anyway, as if I might find a new line I had forgotten. Nothing. I returned to the monitors. The janitorial wing camera pulsed with static. The mop on the floor had shifted. Not much, just a few inches, but enough to notice. I felt a chill work its way down my back. I leaned closer to the other monitors. The storage hallway was empty. The research wing was quiet. The vents showed no movement, but the temperature kept dropping. My breath finally fogged for the first time since I took this job. The lights flickered again. Then the building went completely dark. Not a dim, not a pulse, full, sudden darkness that swallowed everything. I stopped breathing and held perfectly still. Rule 1, do not move. In the total darkness, I felt the vibration again, coming from beneath the floor. Slow, heavy, like something walking below me. A heavy step, then another, then a scraping drag that seemed to trail behind. The emergency lights returned in a blood-red glow. I exhaled slowly. The tension in my jaw felt like it had been carved into stone. I reached for the flashlight but paused when the third hallway camera flashed. A shape appeared. The same tall figure I had seen before, but this time it was closer, much closer. It stood directly beneath the middle light in the third hallway. The light above it flickered weakly. Its outline looked wrong. The limbs too straight, the torso too narrow, the head tilted slightly to the side, as if listening, as if testing the space. The screen glitched again, and the figure vanished. When the image returned, nothing remained but the dark hallway. I switched to another angle of the same wing. The hallway was empty, yet the lights near the far end flickered in a pattern. Slow, then faster, then slow again, like Morse code, like a signal, like something communicating. The hum in my radio grew louder. I turned the volume down completely. The vibration in the floor returned for a moment, then faded. I leaned back in the chair and forced myself to breathe. Then the emergency alarm triggered. A sharp, echoing pulse filled the room. The sound was distant, almost muted, like it came through several walls. The alarm lights rotated somewhere deep inside the facility, painting the halls in slow-moving red streaks. But there was no emergency listed on the system. No fire, no breach, no power failure notification from the internal grid. The alarm was not responding to a mechanical problem. Something had activated it. The lights on the monitors flickered quickly. A few screens returned to normal. The rest stayed frozen on distorted frames. I scanned each one carefully. The janitorial hallway showed nothing. The research wing was clear. The storage corridor was empty. I checked the third hallway one final time. The camera feed was still glitching, but through the distortion, I saw something move. Not a shape, not a shadow. A ripple, a faint ripple in the air, like heat rising from asphalt on a hot day, except the hallway was freezing, and the ripple moved slowly toward the camera. As it advanced, the pixels on the screen bent, warped, then snapped back. The ripple reached halfway down the hallway, then stopped. The glitching intensified for several seconds before the camera went completely black. I sat frozen. I knew I could not go anywhere near that wing. Rule 7 had mentioned tapping. Tonight there was no tapping. Tonight there was something worse, something moving without sound. The emergency lights dimmed slightly. The alarm pulse faded into silence. The building exhaled again. I stayed still, my heart pounding in a slow, heavy rhythm. I waited for the lights to return to normal. They did not. Not fully, but the emergency system finally shut down, leaving the building in a pale half-light. I leaned forward and stared at the screens. One by one, the camera feeds returned to clarity. Every hallway was empty. Every door was closed. Every vent was still. But the building had changed. The feeling in the air had changed. Something had moved freely during the blackout. Something that the rules did not explain, and it was still somewhere inside the walls. The emergency lights stayed dim long after the alarm stopped. The building felt different now. Not colder, not louder, just aware. Like every hallway had eyes hidden behind the walls. I sat in the monitoring room for several minutes, letting the tension in my chest settle. My hands were still shaking from the blackout. The building had moved during the darkness. The cameras had tried to show it, but failed. Whatever traveled through the halls did not want to be seen clearly. I repeated the rules in my head, especially Rule 4. After 2 a.m., do not look at reflective surfaces. It was only 1:18 a.m. I still had time before that rule mattered, but the warning clung to my thoughts like something waiting to happen. The cameras flickered again, but this time, only the third hallway feed blurred. A soft wave of distortion passed across the screen, like heat tightening the air. The entire building hummed with a low vibration. I leaned closer, gripping the edge of the desk. Then the distortion stopped. The hallway looked empty again. At 1:30 a.m. sharp, I stood and prepared for the next patrol. My flashlight beam cut through the cold air as I stepped into the corridor. The moment I entered the hallway, the temperature dropped again. Not a normal drop, a sharp one, like stepping into a freezer. My breath fogged in front of me. The cold tightened the muscles in my face and jaw. The main corridor stretched forward in long blocks of light. The emergency system had returned to normal brightness, but the ceiling panels still buzzed with a faint undercurrent. I walked slowly, forcing myself to breathe evenly. I reached the first corner and turned. The building felt wrong. Not dangerous, not hostile, just wrong, as if the geometry had shifted slightly during the blackout, leaving each hallway with angles that did not match memory. I passed the left wing and glanced toward the storage hallway. Everything looked undisturbed. The door that had slammed earlier remained shut. No vibration from the vents, no tapping, but the air felt heavy, as if something had moved through recently. I continued forward. Each step echoed behind me, but the echo took a little too long to fade. It felt like a second set of footsteps followed behind mine with a slight delay. I refused to look back. The rules never mentioned footsteps, but the building had taught me enough already. Anything behind me was never meant to be acknowledged. I turned into the main corridor leading toward the third hallway. The lights here flickered in small pulses. Not enough to trigger rule stillness, but enough to keep my nerves sharp. As I passed the opening of the third hallway, I kept my eyes forward. I did not look into it. I did not check the shadows. I stayed focused on the far end of the hall. Then something shifted in my peripheral vision. The floor, the lights. No, my reflection. The glass panel on the wall to my right caught the light from my flashlight. A faint reflection showed my silhouette. But something in that reflection moved a moment too late. A delayed motion, a hesitation, a glitch in the image. Rule 4 snapped into my mind like a warning shot. Do not look at reflective surfaces after 2 a.m. It was not after 2 a.m. yet, but the rule was already being tested. I told myself not to look again. I told myself to keep walking, but fear has weight. Fear has a pull, and I looked. just for 1 second, just enough to understand why Rule 4 existed. My reflection stared back at me, not in sync, not matching my breathing, not standing still. It lifted its hand slowly. I did not move mine. Its head tilted to the left until the neck bent at a painful angle. Its mouth opened slightly, no sound, just a silent shape of a word. A single word repeated again and again. It was my name. I stumbled back, my breath caught in my throat. My heart hammered inside my chest. The reflection snapped back into normal position instantly, as if nothing had happened. My real body shook as I pointed the flashlight down the hall and forced myself to breathe. Rule 4 was not meant to protect me from mirrors. It was meant to protect me from what used the mirrors. I turned away and walked fast. The building felt tighter now, like the air was closing in. Every breath felt shallow. Every shadow looked too long. I reached the end of the hall and leaned against the wall for a moment. I checked my watch. 57 a.m. 3 minutes until the rule officially became active. The air shifted around me. A faint breeze brushed against my neck as if someone stood inches behind me. I did not turn. I walked faster, desperate to reach the monitoring room before the clock hit 2 a.m. As I moved through the final stretch of hallway, the lights flickered again. A long flicker this time, enough to trigger instinct, enough to freeze me in place. My heart pounded. My breath stopped. The lights stayed dim for several seconds. I felt something behind me. Not close, far down the hall, but moving. Slow, measured. Each step sounded like a weight dragging across the floor. My mouth went dry. The lights came back. I broke into a fast walk without looking back. I passed the last corner, and the monitoring room door came into view. I reached for the handle. The door window caught my reflection again. I looked by accident, not intentionally, just a half-second glance, and that was enough. My reflection turned its head toward me. Only the reflection, only the glass version of me. Its eyes widened, its mouth opened as if it were gasping for air. Then its hand rose and pressed against the inside of the glass. Fingers spread, palm flat, like it was trying to escape. I stumbled backward and nearly fell. I forced myself to look away and grab the door handle. I pulled it open and stepped inside. I shut the door quickly. The second the door closed, the clock on the wall clicked to 2 a.m., a sharp, clean click. My reflection on the darkened window of the monitoring room disappeared. Not faded, not dimmed, disappeared completely, as if the glass had been wiped of anything that resembled a person. I collapsed into the chair and pressed my palms to my face. My breathing came fast and shallow. My pulse pounded hard enough that I felt it in my teeth. The building had warned me. The rules had warned me. The staff had warned me, and I still broke Rule 4 early. Not by choice, but because the building wanted me to. Something had changed after the blackout. Something wanted my attention. Something wanted me to look into the glass, and it got what it wanted. Now I had no idea what that meant for the rest of the night, or for me. The moment I broke Rule 4, the building changed. It was not something I saw. It was something I felt. The air inside the monitoring room tightened. The temperature dropped again, but in a different way than before. This cold felt targeted, focused, as if the building knew my mistake and was waiting to show me the cost. I leaned back in the chair and shut my eyes, trying to steady my breathing. My reflection had moved on its own. It had spoken my name without sound. It had pressed its hand against the glass as if trying to break through. I could not forget the look in its eyes. Wide, desperate, hungry. When I finally opened my eyes again, the screens flickered once more. A long glitch dragged across every camera at the same time. The picture twisted, straightened, then froze for a full second before returning to normal. But something new had appeared. A motion alert in the east wing, the evidence storage room. That room was always sealed. The supervisor had mentioned it once, only in passing, and only with tension in his voice. I stared at the blinking indicator, feeling my pulse rise again. The rules did not forbid entering that room, but they did not encourage curiosity either. Nothing in that building encouraged curiosity. For several seconds, I simply watched the motion icon blink. Finally, I stood. I grabbed the flashlight. I checked the radio. I breathed slowly until the shaking in my hands settled. Then I stepped out into the hall. The corridor outside the monitoring room looked normal again. The lights were steady. The air was cold but not painfully so. I headed toward the east wing, sticking to the middle of the hallway, away from the walls and their shadows. Halfway down the main corridor, I heard a faint clicking sound, soft, rhythmic, like something tapping on metal from behind a door. I ignored it and kept moving. When I reached the east wing entrance, the air shifted. A faint draft brushed against my neck even though no vents were nearby. The hallway smelled different here, older, dustier, as if this part of the facility had been untouched for years. The evidence room door stood ahead at the end of the hall, a thick metal slab with a lockbox mounted beside it. The small red light on the panel flickered weakly, struggling to stay lit. As I got closer, I noticed scratch marks around the lockbox, thin lines carved into the metal, too many to count, too deep to be normal. The door was closed, locked, motionless. But my flashlight beam caught the slightest movement through the small observation window. Not a shape, not a shadow, just dust shifting inside the room without airflow. I scanned the hall again, empty. I reached for the lockbox. The moment my fingers touched the metal, the light on the panel blinked green, just once, a bright, unnatural flash. Then the lock clicked open. I froze. The system never opened doors on its own, not here, not without a key or code. Something had unlocked it for me. My breath tightened in my chest, but the door was now open, and leaving it ajar would break Rule 5. I pushed the handle slowly and stepped inside. The temperature dropped instantly. My breath fogged. The air tasted like dust and cold metal. Rows of shelves filled the small room. Each shelf held boxes, folders, old evidence bags, yellowing papers. Some were labeled with dates, others had warnings written in thick black marker. As I moved deeper into the room, the shelves closed in around me. The flashlight illuminated only thin paths of light between the stacks. Shadows stretched far along the floor. My heartbeat echoed in my ears. Halfway through the rows, something caught my eye. A file had fallen open on the floor. Pages spread around it. Some pages were torn at the edges. I crouched down and picked up the first sheet. A security report. Date, 11 years ago. Summary, Guard 3 violated Rule 4. Description of incident withheld. Body unrecovered. My stomach tightened. The next page described a different incident. Date, 9 years ago. Summary, Rule 2 failure. Entity successfully mimicked supervisor's voice. Guard responded. Found only torn radio and blood smear. I sifted through more pages. Every sheet contained a rule violation. Every rule had a victim. Every victim had been absorbed into silence. Then I found something that made my breath stop. A report titled, Reflection Event. The description was handwritten, the writing uneven and rushed. The subject saw their reflection move independently. Reflection attempted communication. Reflection attempted physical contact. Reflection attempted escape. Below it, a final line was scrawled in darker ink. Once the reflection speaks your name, it will follow you. My hands began to shake. My reflection had done exactly that. I set the pages down and reached for another file. This one was thicker, filled with photos, camera stills, some blurry, some distorted, but all showed the same shape: tall, thin, crooked limbs, a head tilted like a question mark. The same figure I had seen in the third hallway camera. The final page showed a still image labeled Containment Breach. Entity observed near HVAC system. The vents above my head creaked, not loudly, not aggressively, just a soft settling noise. But it did not feel like settling. It felt like something shifting its weight. I turned my flashlight upward. The vent grate in the evidence room ceiling bulged outward slightly, as if something pressed against it from the inside. I took one step back. Then the vent exhaled. A warm breath drifted across my face. Warm, not cold. It felt like something alive was inches above me. I stumbled back and hit one of the shelves. Boxes shook, papers fell. A folder slid off the top row and landed at my feet. I looked at the label. Incidents, After Dark Reflections. I left it on the floor. I did not want to see what was inside. My pulse thudded in my ears as I backed toward the door. The vent creaked again. A soft, almost curious sound, like something shifting its position to watch me leave. I stepped outside quickly and pulled the door shut. The lock clicked immediately, as if the building wanted it sealed. The temperature in the hallway rose slightly. My breath stopped fogging, but the pressure in the air stayed heavy. The same feeling I got earlier when the emergency lights dimmed. I turned to walk back toward the monitoring room. Halfway down the corridor, I stopped. The glass window on the right reflected the hallway. My reflection was not standing the same way I was. Its head was turned slightly toward me. Its shoulder was lifted higher than mine. Its mouth was open in a small smile I did not have. I stepped away from the glass without looking again. My chest tightened as I walked fast, almost running. I reached the monitoring room, opened the door, and pulled it shut behind me. I sat down and pressed my hands against my knees. Breaking Rule 4 had consequences. I understood that now. The evidence room had not shown me answers. It had shown me warnings. Warnings written by people who never made it out. And the reflection that called my name was only the beginning. Something was following me now, something that wanted me to look again. The walk back to the monitoring room felt longer than usual. Every step echoed in the corridor like something was matching my rhythm from a distance. My shoulders were tight, my breathing shallow. The evidence room had shown me more than I wanted to know. Now, every shadow in the facility felt sharper, as if the building expected me to understand its behavior. I closed the monitoring room door behind me and checked the clock. 2:30 in the morning, the time of night when the rules shifted from strange to lethal. Rule 4 was already broken. The consequences were already following me, but Rule 7 was the one that echoed in my head now. If you hear tapping from the third hallway, do not approach. I sat down and scanned the cameras. The third hallway feed flickered softly. Not a glitch, a pulse. A slow wave of distortion washed through the image every few seconds. The camera was working hard to display something it did not want to reveal. I leaned forward and squinted. For a moment, the distortion cleared. The hallway lights were on. Not flickering, not dim, fully on. This alone was wrong. Those lights almost never stayed steady at night. There was always faint blinking, small dips, minor static, but now they shone bright and still, like the hallway was inviting attention. A faint vibration spread through the floor. I felt it in my shoes. The building groaned quietly, the sound moving through the walls, like something large shifting beneath the surface. I turned up the volume on the third hallway camera. Silence. Then a soft pulse. Not tapping, not footsteps, just a gentle thump, as if something pressed against the far wall and released. I tried to look away, but the camera image kept pulling my attention. The lights in that hallway did not look normal. They looked warm, almost inviting. I had never seen warmth in this building. The entire facility existed in cold tones, grey, blue, white. But the third hallway looked touched by something different tonight. Check the other hallway feeds. Nothing. Stillness. Cold. Light. Only the third hallway glowed. I should have stayed in the chair. I should have ignored it. But I found myself standing before I realized what I was doing. The building wanted me to look. Maybe it wanted more. My legs moved with quiet resistance. Each step down the main corridor felt heavier than the last. The air seemed thicker. I reached the corner where the hallway opened into the three main routes. The third hallway waited at the far end of the left wing. The moment I stepped into the left corridor, the temperature dropped again. My breath fogged. The lights overhead flickered twice, then steadied. I walked slowly, flashlight in hand. The building hummed faintly. The vibration in the floor grew stronger the farther I went. Halfway down the corridor, I heard a soft clicking sound above me. Something shifted in the vents. Not scratching, not crawling, just repositioning, as if watching me from above. I did not look up. I continued until the third hallway came into view. It looked different in person than on the screen. Brighter, longer. The walls seemed smoother, almost polished. The air in front of the hallway shimmered faintly. A soft, almost invisible ripple moved through the space. A thin draft brushed my face. It smelled like cold stone and something faintly metallic. I stayed several feet away from the entrance. Rule 7 forbade approaching it if I heard tapping. There was no tapping, but the rule did not account for what I was seeing now. The lights inside the hallway grew brighter, one by one, as if turning on in sequence. The far end lit up last, and in that last patch of light, I saw something. A figure. Not standing, not facing me, just a small shape crouched low as if pressed against the wall. Its back rose and fell slowly, breathing, alive. waiting. I choked on my breath. My flashlight shook in my hand. The figure did not react. It stayed crouched, head lowered, arms long and thin against the floor. It looked almost human at first, then the shape shifted slightly. The limbs were too long, the spine bent too sharply. The knees were turned inward at unnatural angles. My pulse raced. I stepped back without making a sound. Then the lights flickered once. The figure twitched. Only a fraction, only a small turn of the head. But that was enough. Its face was wrong. Too smooth, too pale. No features except a faint indentation where eyes should be. It tilted its head again, listening. The lights flickered. The air grew colder. My throat tightened. I forced myself to step back again. The figure lifted one hand slowly and placed its long fingers on the floor. The bend of its joints looked painful. No sound came from it. No breathing, no scraping. Just the soft shift of skin against tile. The building hummed. The hallway lights dimmed. The figure froze, completely still. Then the tapping began. Soft at first. A slow rhythm, like fingertips tapping lightly against the floor. Tap, tap, tap. I stopped breathing. Rule 7. Do not approach. The figure lifted its head slightly. The tapping grew louder. Tap, tap, tap. Faster now, sharper. The air shook with each tap. I stepped backward again. Slow, careful. The tapping stopped. Silence. The figure lowered its head. Then something else happened. The walls of the third hallway pulsed, not flickered. Pulsed, like a heartbeat moving. Through the structure. The floor vibrated with it. My flashlight dimmed slightly in my hand. I realized what I was seeing. The hallway was breathing. The entire structure shifted in rhythm. A slow inhale, a slow exhale, and the crouched figure moved with the rhythm, as if it were part of the hallway, as if the building itself had grown a shape inside it. I stepped back quickly now, unable to steady my breathing. The moment I crossed the halfway point of the corridor, the lights brightened behind me. The tapping stopped completely. The figure stayed frozen. I did not look back again. Every instinct told me the third hallway had not shown me the worst part. It had shown me the beginning. When I reached the monitoring room, my hands were numb. I shut the door quietly, locked it, sat down without removing my eyes from the screens. The third hallway camera flickered again, then stabilized. The hallway looked empty. No figure, no tapping, no breathing pulse in the walls. But I had seen what the cameras tried to hide. That hallway was not just a corridor. It was something alive, something sentient, something watching, and it had noticed me. I stayed in the monitoring room long after returning from the third hallway. My body refused to settle. My breathing stayed uneven. The memory of that crouched shape clung to me like cold water. Every time I blinked, I saw its long fingers pressing into the floor, its faceless head tilting toward the light. The building felt different now. Its silence was not emptiness. It was listening. Every hum in the walls carried weight. Every faint vibration felt deliberate. I forced myself to check the cameras again. The third hallway was empty, clear, still, clean. It was a lie. I knew it was a lie. The building only showed what it wanted to show. A vibration moved through the floor beneath my chair. Not strong, not steady, a soft tremor, like someone dragging their hand along the underside of the building. I straightened, gripping the armrests. The tremor traveled from the left wing to the right wing, slow, heavy, like something moving inside the foundation. My pulse jumped. Something was awake under the floors. I checked the vents on the side wall. They looked still, but the metal carried a faint tension in its frame, like it was straining to contain movement behind it. I stood up slowly. I could feel the air shift with my motion. Cold air wrapped around my arms like static. My skin prickled instantly. The building was reacting to me. A soft crack echoed through the ceiling. Then another, then a third. I held my breath. It reminded me of joints popping, bones shifting, a spine stretching after a long sleep. The fluorescent lights flickered again, but not from power issues. The flicker traveled down the hallway outside the monitoring room like a wave. Each panel dimmed, brightened, then dimmed again as the wave moved deeper into the facility. It was synchronized, controlled, intentional. Something inside the building was stretching its limbs. I leaned closer to the window in the monitoring room door. The hallway outside was bathed in pale light, but the shadows looked wrong. They looked thicker, heavier, as if the darkness had gained weight. My reflection did not appear in the window glass. I stepped back immediately. Rule 4 was broken. The building would take advantage of that whenever it wanted. The cameras flickered again. This time, every hallway on the first floor lit up at once. Bright, blinding, artificial. Then everything snapped back to darkness. Only the emergency lights remained. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. I checked the screens again, moving camera by camera. Storage hallway, empty. Research wing, still. Main corridor, no movement. Then I reached the northeast stairwell feed. A shadow stood next to the railing. It was tall, still, solid, not a trick of light, not a distortion, a presence. Before I could process it, the shadow shifted. Slowly, carefully, like it was turning its head toward the camera. The screen glitched. The image warped. When it cleared, the stairwell was empty. A chill ran through my spine. My legs felt weak. I reached for the radio. It was silent. Not even static, just dead air. The building had cut communication again. The walls groaned around me with a deep, resonant sound. The lights overhead flickered twice, then steadied. The air grew colder, much colder than before. A soft scraping noise echoed through the vents. Not crawling, not tapping, dragging. Something long brushed against the metal inside the ventilation system. I looked up, frozen. The vent above the desk bowed outward for half a second, then relaxed. I backed away slowly. The air near the vent felt warmer than the rest of the room. Warm breath, not mechanical heat. Something was inside the ventilation system again, but this time it was not hiding. The building groaned from deep below, a low rumble, a shifting of weight, like something massive rolling under the foundation. The floor vibrated. The lights flickered. The cameras froze for several seconds. When the feeds returned, something was wrong. The angles had changed. Subtle, but real. The hallways looked slightly narrower, the doors slightly taller, the corners slightly sharper. The building had shifted its architecture. I felt sweat on my forehead. Even though the air was freezing, the building was alive. Tonight, and it was rearranging itself. The vents rattled again, harder this time. A sharp metallic tremor followed by a heavy thud in the ductwork. Something moved from one vent to the next. Fast. Too fast. Like a long body sliding through the system without resistance. I turned toward the far corner of the room, listening carefully. The sound grew louder, then stopped. Right above my head, a soft exhale drifted downward. I stepped away slowly, careful not to make any sudden noise. My flashlight beam hit the vent grate. The metal was bent slightly outward. A single fingerprint smeared the corner, but the smear was wrong. The finger was too long, the spacing unnatural. I swallowed hard. Every inch of this building was changing because something inside it was awake. Something that belonged to the walls. Something that pulled the vents open like cloth. Something that dragged shadows behind it like a living veil. The lights in the hallway outside the monitoring room flickered again, then dimmed, then shut off entirely. Only the emergency red glow remained. The faint hum of the building grew louder, a deep vibration that buzzed inside my ribs. I stared at the screens again, trying to track the source of the movement. The feeds warped one by one. Not a glitch, pressure. Something was passing by the cameras. Something large enough to distort the lenses without touching them. On the West Wing feed, the lights flickered. The distortion bent the image. Then a flowing shape passed across the hall. Not waving, not walking, sliding. Like a shadow wrapped in skin. It turned the corner and disappeared. I stepped back from the console. Every instinct told me to hide, to run, to curl up and wait. But I could not leave the room. The building was shifting too much. I did not know what shape the halls had anymore. The walls groaned again. The floor trembled. The vents clicked. The shadows lengthened. Something had awakened inside the structure, and it knew I was watching. The monitoring room felt smaller now. The walls seemed closer, the ceiling lower. The red emergency glow from the hallway leaked through the small window in the door, stretching long shadows across the floor. My breathing stayed uneven, but I forced myself to stay seated. The building was shifting around me. I could feel it in the vibrations under the floor, in the tension in the vents, in the flicker of every hallway light. I stared at the screens, not blinking, not moving. The cameras flickered again. A wave of distortion swept over them, stronger than before. The picture twisted as if the lens itself was bending. I gripped the desk, trying to keep steady. The West Wing feed glitched hard. The image froze, then snapped. A tall figure appeared on the screen. Its silhouette nearly filled the frame. Long limbs, crooked shoulders, a head too narrow to be human. It stood perfectly still under the red emergency light. The shadow it cast stretched across the floor behind it like something detached from its body. Before I could react, the figure turned its head toward the camera. Slow, mechanical, painfully deliberate. The screen warped violently. The image folded into black shapes and static before returning to empty hallways. But I knew it had not vanished. It had moved out of view, or closer to a blind spot. I checked. The next camera down the hall, empty. The one after that, empty. Switched through every feed in that wing. Nothing. Either the creature moved faster than the cameras could track, or the building was hiding it again. Then the northeast stairwell feed glitched. Bad. The image cracked into lines. Static poured across the screen. Then the frame snapped back into focus. A shape stood at the bottom of the stairwell. Not tall this time. Smaller, bent, crouched. Its head hung low, as if listening to the vibrations in the floor. I held my breath. Then its head snapped upward, straight toward the camera. My skin tightened. The figure moved in a blur, crossing half the stairwell in a single jump. The camera lagged behind, freezing mid-motion. The creature reached the last step. The screen blacked out. The lights in the monitoring room flickered. The vents above me rattled. Something was moving in the building, rapid, strong, a weight sliding through the metal, like a predator through tall grass. I took a slow step backward from the monitors. The radio on my chest buzzed faintly. No words, just a low hum, like a deep breath. The hum shifted into a sharp, crackling tone, as if someone pressed a mouth against the speaker. Then a voice whispered my name, not behind me, through the radio, but too distorted to be human. I dropped the device. It clattered to the floor, the hum continuing until it faded into silence. Rule 2. If you hear your name from behind you, do not respond. This was not behind me, but it was close enough. I crouched and reached for the radio with shaking fingers, turning it off completely. The air in the room tightened again. The vents above me gave a soft shudder. I knew I was not alone. I stood slowly and faced the screens again. The entire system froze for a moment. All feeds, all cameras, all angles. A single frame appeared on every screen. The back of my own head. I stumbled away from the monitors and pressed my back against the far wall. The image stayed frozen. My silhouette in the chair, my shoulders slightly hunched, my hands on the keyboard. Something was posing as me. Something was showing me what it wanted me to see. The lights flickered again. A faint scrape echoed from the hallway outside. The sound of metal dragging across tile. Slow, heavy, measured. I stepped quietly toward the monitoring room door, holding my breath. I peeked through the narrow window. Red light filled the corridor, painting the hall in long shadows. The emergency lights rotated, casting moving shapes across the walls. The floor vibrated softly, as if something large was passing through another part of the facility. I checked the far end of the corridor. Empty. Then I looked left. The air seemed to ripple, a faint shimmer, like heat rising from cold stone. The shimmer moved, slowly, toward the monitoring room. I stepped back. Instantly, the shimmer grew more defined, longer, taller, a shape materializing inside the distortion. Its outline sharpened into a tall, thin figure, limbs crooked, head tilted, hands dragging along the walls. My pulse raced. I looked at the door handle, terrified it might twist downward. The figure reached the door. It stopped. It stood inches away from the window. I held my breath. I did not move. Not a muscle. The creature leaned closer. The glass fogged slightly. One long finger lifted and tapped gently on the window. Just once. The glass vibrated under the pressure. The tapping stopped. The creature tilted its head as if listening. Then its form melted back into the red light. The shimmer faded. The figure vanished. For several seconds I could not move. I stayed pressed against the wall, unable to breathe. The vents above me rattled again. Not lightly this time. Hard. Then a heavy thud sounded inside the ductwork. Metal bowed outward slightly. Dust drifted down in thin lines. Something crawled inside the ventilation system. something much larger than any duct should allow. The metal groaned under the weight. I backed away from the vent until my shoulders hit the opposite wall. Every nerve in my body screamed to run, but the building had reshaped itself. The hallways were not safe. I looked back at the monitors. The feeds came back online one by one. The hallways were empty. The stairwell was still. The third hallway showed nothing, but on the far right monitor, something caught my eye. A shadow. Not on the floor, not on the wall. Behind the camera, a shape casting its form onto the lens. The shadow grew sharper, taller, wider. Then, the screen glitched and went black again. A soft scratching. Noise sounded at the bottom of the monitoring room door. Slow, dragging, as if long nails scraped gently across the surface. I held my breath. I did not move. The scratching stopped. Silence returned. Then the metal vent above me exhaled. Warm breath drifted down onto my shoulder. My knees threatened to give out. Something was inside the room with me, not through the door, through the ventilation system. Something that moved silently when it wanted. Something that could mimic my image on camera. Something that tapped the window without fear. I did not dare look up. I stayed, still, waiting, listening. Time stretched into something endless. Only when the vent above me fell silent did I take a careful step back toward the desk. The cameras flickered back into clarity. The hallways were empty again, but I knew the truth. The creature had entered the monitoring room and it had left on its own terms. The vent above me stayed silent, but the silence felt wrong. Heavy, watching. I stared at it for several seconds, waiting for another breath, another shift, another groan of metal. Nothing came. The stillness made my skin crawl even more. My chest tightened until I could barely breathe. Every instinct inside me pushed toward one thought. Leave. Get out of the building. Get out now. Before the walls change again. Before the thing in the vents decides to test me a second time. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped toward the monitoring room door. My legs felt weak. My breath trembled. I opened the door slowly and looked into the hallway. The emergency lights cast everything in a blood-red glow. The ceiling bulbs flickered in long pulses. The air smelled like metal and cold stone. Shadows stretched across the floor in thin, sharp lines. The corridor looked wrong, too long, too narrow, too dark at the edges. The building had shifted again. I stepped into the hall anyway. The door behind me clicked shut with a dull vibration. My footsteps echoed strangely. One echo too many. A faint second step behind mine, softer, out of sync. I refused to look back. Rule 2 was not just about voices. It was about attention, curiosity. The thing behind me thrived on attention. I walked faster. The hall stretched forward like a tunnel. The turn toward the main exit was at the far end. At least it should have been. But as I moved closer, the angles felt wrong. The floor seemed to tilt slightly, as if the building had been slanted by a few degrees. I gripped the flashlight tighter. Halfway to the exit corridor, I passed a row of office windows. The glass reflected the red emergency lights. For a moment, I kept my head down to avoid seeing my reflection. But something in the corner of my vision made my stomach clench. A shape stood inside one of the offices. Tall, still, pressed against the glass from the inside. Its face was inches from the window, white, featureless, tilted toward me. I kept walking without slowing. My heartbeat thudded against my ribs. The reflection in the glass began to move even though I did not. The shape inside the office dragged its long fingers against the glass as I passed, not tapping, dragging, leaving thin streaks behind. I walked faster. My breath tightened. When I reached the end of the corridor, a cold draft brushed across my face. The hallway opened into a wider intersection. The signs above the doors usually pointed toward the lobby and exit, but now the signs were wrong. They faced the opposite direction. Every arrow pointed backward, every label reversed. The building had shifted the layout again. I turned right, forcing myself to rely on memory instead of signs. The path should lead to the main hall, then to the entrance lobby. I walked quickly, ignoring the cold sweat running down my neck. The hallway stretched on. Too long. I should have reached the next turn already. The walls tightened around me. The red light flickered violently for a moment, washing the corridor in sharp shadows that moved unnaturally. A door slammed shut somewhere behind me. I broke into a fast walk, then a louder slam echoed from the left, another from the right, each one closer, each one in rhythm with my steps. My breathing turned ragged. The building was following me, herding me, closing the halls behind me like a maze adjusting around a trapped animal. I reached the next corner and turned sharply. The lobby should have been ahead, but instead, the third hallway stretched before me, bright, lit, breathing. My stomach dropped. The walls pulsed softly. The lights flickered in a slow rhythm like a heartbeat. At the far end of the hallway, the air rippled. A silhouette formed inside the ripple, tall, bending, shifting. I stepped back immediately. The emergency lights behind me dimmed, and the hallway I had just come from grew darker. The way forward was blocked. The way back was shrinking. I turned right into another corridor. This one led to a row of old offices. The doors were closed. The lights flickered. The temperature felt colder here than anywhere else in the building. As I walked, the office windows fogged over one by one. First the left, then the right. Fog spread across the glass in long streaks, as if breath pressed from the inside. I kept moving. The vents above my head rattled again. A long scrape traveled from one end of the duct to the other, something sliding fast. I ducked instinctively. The scraping stopped. I continued moving, forcing myself not to freeze. Panic tightened my throat. My legs shook with each step. Then the lights flickered violently. The entire corridor plunged into darkness for a full second. When the lights returned, something was standing in the middle of the hall, not far ahead, not at the edge of my flashlight beam, 10 feet away. A silhouette, tall, looming, perfectly still. Its limbs hung at angles that made my chest tighten. Its head was tilted too far to the side. Its torso looked stretched, like someone had pulled it upward until the spine cracked. I stepped back, gripping my flashlight so tightly it hurt. The silhouette did not move, but the shadows under its feet shifted, like something crawled beneath them. The building groaned again. A long, deep vibration passed through the floor. The silhouette lifted one hand slowly. A long, thin arm bent inward with unnatural grace. It pointed toward the far end of the hall, the exit. My heartbeat pulsed in my ears. I stepped backward. The silhouette lowered its arm. Then it took one step. No sound, no breath, just a smooth, silent movement that made my legs buckle. I turned and ran. My footsteps slammed against the floor. The emergency lights strobed hard, pulsing, red and white as if warning the facility of my movement. The hall twisted again, turning left where it used to turn right. I nearly lost my balance. Doors on both sides rattled as I passed. Some slammed, some opened. Cold air rushed from a few, brushing my back like hands reaching out. I reached the final corridor leading to the lobby, a long, straight path. Red lights lined the ceiling. The air smelled like dust and cold metal. Halfway down the hall, the lights ahead burst. A shower of sparks rained from the ceiling. Glass shattered. Darkness swallowed the far end. Then a silhouette appeared in the broken lights. Still, silent, blocking the exit completely. It waited for me. My chest locked tight. I stepped backwards slowly, flashlight trembling in my hand. Whatever was in the building had no intention of letting me leave. The walls tightened. The shadows stretched. The hallway behind me dimmed. I was not escaping tonight. Not easily. Not alive unless I understood how to outrun something that did not use footsteps. The silhouette blocking the exit did not move. It stood like a tall fracture in the hallway, cutting through the red emergency light. My breath shook in my throat. My flashlight beam barely reached the figure. What the light touched bent and warped as if the shape absorbed it instead of reflecting it. The building was closing around me. Every corridor I chose twisted back into itself. Every attempt at escape seemed to lead straight to the thing waiting near the exit. I stepped backwards slowly, keeping my eyes locked on the silhouette. It did not advance. Not yet, but it did something worse. It tilted its head as if listening to the building's pulse. A single long breath escaped the vents above me. Not mine. Not the facility's machinery. Something alive in the ductwork. I turned away from the silhouette and walked quickly toward the nearest door. The office hallway bent slightly, almost imperceptibly. The floors felt angled under my feet. The shadows stretched along the walls like strands of fabric pulled tight. I reached a door labeled Research Wing Access. I had never been inside. No route required it. No rule mentioned it. I pulled the handle. The door should have been locked. Instead, it opened smoothly. The air inside was warmer than the hallway. Not comforting warm. A stale, heavy warmth, like a room sealed too long. My flashlight swept across scattered furniture, dismantled workstations, loose papers and overturned equipment. It looked like the place had been abandoned in a hurry. No dust, just absence. The layout did not match the rest of the building. The room stretched wider than the outside walls should allow. I took several steps inside, listening to the faint hum of lights that still worked. I found a thick folder sitting on a broken desk near the center. Pages were spilling from the edges. Some were typed, some handwritten, some crumpled. My hands trembled as I opened it. Page 1, Project Overview Objective. Study anomalous entity detected during Foundation excavation. Properties: non-physical at rest, physical when stimulated. Primary behavior: mimicry. Shadow displacement, reflection manipulation. Environmental influence. My throat tightened as I read the next line. Entity responds to human attention. I swallowed hard. Page 2. Incident reports. Incident OS4. Shadow independent movement. Incident 09. Reflection communication attempt. Incident 12. First vent breach. Incident 16. Full containment failure. Incident 17. Creation of first rule. My heart pounded. This facility did not create the rules to maintain order. They created them to stay alive. I flipped through more pages. Page 3. Entity description. The handwriting on this page was frantic. It is not one thing. It is the building. It uses the walls. It uses the vents. It uses whatever we look at. The rules do not keep us safe. They keep us predictable. Predictability slows it down. The next lines were scratched out violently. I held the paper closer to read the faint indentations beneath the ink. It learns every movement, every breath, every mistake. It repeats what works. It abandons what fails. It is evolving faster than containment can adapt. A shiver ran through my entire body. Something cracked loudly in the vent above me. Not a shift, not settling metal. A knock, measured, purposeful, once, twice, 3 times. My breath froze. The vent grill bent outward slightly as if something pressed a long limb against it. Dust drifted down in soft spirals. The building knew I was here. The entity knew I was reading. Maybe it wanted me to. I backed away from the desk, clutching the folder. My flashlight shook with my hands. My pulse hammered against my ribs. Something scraped gently across the vent's interior. Slow, dragging, patient. I forced myself to move toward the deeper section of the room. More documents lay scattered across metal tables. I skimmed the headings quickly. Hallway events. Mimicry. Attempts. Reflection recurrence. Shadow. Separation. New rule proposal. Then I found one page that stopped me cold. Draft rule. Reflection. Breach protocol. If a guard breaks rule 4.1, do not allow them near glass. Do not speak there. Name. Do not let them see their reflection again. Do not allow them near the third hallway. They are no longer safe to work night shifts. The final line was underlined. The entity marks. Those who break Rule 4I felt lightheaded. The building seemed to tilt slightly. The vents above me groaned again. A new realization sank into my chest like a weight. I was marked. Something had followed me since the moment my reflection moved. Something was waiting for me to slip, to look, to break another rule. The emergency lights in the research wing flickered. The room dimmed. The hum in the walls increased. I stepped backward toward the door, but the hallway outside flickered suddenly. The exit path warped slightly, as if the distance between me and the corridor stretched farther. The silhouette from the lobby was no longer visible on the monitors, but that did not comfort me. I no longer knew how many of them existed, or if it was one thing wearing many forms. I clutched the folder tightly and stepped toward the main corridor again. The hallway looked longer than before. Much longer. The red emergency glow had deepened into a darker shade, painting everything in a dull, bloody haze. The shadows on the floor swayed faintly. I took a step forward. The building exhaled again, a slow breath rushing through the vents. Warm air swept down from above. Something whispered faintly. Not my name, not a word, just a sound. A slow, deliberate sound that slid along the walls. I kept moving, my legs shaking. The lights above me blinked twice, and I felt the building shift again. The walls pressed inward. The ceiling felt lower. The air felt thinner. Then I heard a faint scrape behind me. I turned slowly. A figure stood at the far end of the hallway. Not the tall one, not the crouched one, something different. Its arms were long enough to brush the floor. Its head tilted forward. Its limbs bent inward like broken steel rods. It stepped once. No sound, just the shifting of shadows. I stepped back, clutching the folder like it could save me from what was coming. The figure took another step, slow and steady. I turned and ran. The hallway twisted again as I moved. The floor slanted. The walls shifted. Door frames stretched taller. Emergency lights popped one by one, raining sparks onto the tiles. The folder slipped from my hands. Papers scattered behind me in a long trail. Somewhere deep in the building, alarms began to blare. Not the normal system. A different alarm. Lower, darker, like a warning for something far worse. I stumbled into the next corridor and slammed my back against the wall, breathing hard. The building groaned again, like something large was moving inside the walls. I looked down at the single page that remained in my hand. Once marked, a guard cannot be unmarked. The entity will follow. My heart dropped. Something exhaled behind me. I did not turn. I did not breathe. I understood now. I was not surviving the facility. The facility was surviving me. I stayed pressed against the wall until the cold from the concrete sank into my skin. My breath was thin. My legs trembled. The page in my hand felt heavier than paper should. The alarms in the distance continued their low, rumbling wail, vibrating through the building like a warning pulse. The thing behind me had stopped breathing. That was not comfort. That meant it was listening. I forced my legs to move. One step, then another. The hallway felt tilted beneath my feet, as if the building no longer cared about keeping its shape. I followed the only direction the corridors allowed, letting instinct guide me more than memory. The building had twisted itself into a maze, but every wrong turn seemed to funnel me toward a single destination. I knew where it was leading me. The third hallway. The place that pulsed like a living artery. The place where the entity's presence felt thick and undeniable. The place the rules told me to avoid above all else. The floor vibrated again. A soft, slow rhythm. A heartbeat moving through concrete. I walked faster, my flashlight beam shaking across the walls. When I reached the next intersection, the floor dipped downward slightly. The lights flickered along the ceiling in a slow spiral, almost in sequence. The ventilation grills rattled softly, as if something was sliding behind them. The hallway ahead glowed faintly, not red, white, pure, cold. The third hallway. My stomach sank. The building wanted this. It wanted me. There. The light in the third hallway pulsed again. A slow inhale, a slow exhale, like a living chest expanding and contracting. I stepped forward, unable to fight the pull anymore. The temperature dropped with every footstep. My breath fogged in front of me. The walls changed subtly, becoming smoother, almost polished. My shoes made no sound on the floor. Each step felt like stepping into a space that did not want sound. I reached the entrance and froze. The hallway was lit from end to end. Soft white lights glowed overhead. The walls glimmered faintly as if coated in something slick. The air shimmered with distortion. And at the far end, the same figure waited, crouched, head lowered, limbs bent inward like a preying animal. But this time, the air around it rippled more violently. The distortion spread across the floor. across the walls, a trembling effect that made the hallway look unstable. I took a careful step inside. The hallway pulsed in response. Lights brightened, walls tightened, shadows stretched. The figure reacted. Its head lifted slightly. Its long fingers curled against the floor. It inhaled sharply through a throat that should not have been able to breathe. I held my breath. Then the walls around me darkened. Not from the lights, from something moving behind the surface. Shadows seeped downward from the ceiling like liquid, long streaks that stretched until they reached the floor. They did not follow the rules of light. They moved independently. They crawled like ink under water. Rule 3. Keep walking. I stepped forward. The hallway pulsed again. A faint tremor moved through the floor, rising through my legs. The building hummed around me with a deep resonance. My flashlight glow twisted in the air, bending unnaturally, like the light was pulled toward the creature at the far end. I was halfway down the hallway when I heard it. A tapping sound. Gentle, measured, from the walls, from above, from the floor itself. Not one source. Many. Dozens of fingertips tapping in slow rhythm. Rule 7 forbade approaching the tapping, but I had no choice. The building sealed every exit. The hallway behind me darkened. The floor shifted under my feet. This was the only path left. The tapping grew louder. The figure at the far end rose slowly to its feet. My breath caught painfully in my throat. Its movements were not human, not steady, not stiff. It unfolded itself. Bones bending the wrong way, limbs stretching until they reached impossible lengths. It stood fully upright, taller than the door frames, taller than the lights. Its head brushed the ceiling. The tapping stopped. Silence. Then the creature stepped forward. Its foot did not make a sound. The air rippled around it. The light bent behind its body. The hallway trembled in response. I stepped back. The creature took another step, faster, sharper, its head tilted forward as if inspecting me. The walls vibrated. The floor pulsed. My heart slammed against my chest. Then, the entity stopped, not from hesitation, not from fear. It stopped because something else appeared behind it. A door. A door that had never existed before. Tall, black, frameless. Standing alone at the end of the hallway, as if grown from the floor itself. The creature turned slightly, almost acknowledging the door. Then it looked back at me. It wanted me to choose, face it, or take the door. The walls around me pulsed again. I felt the building pulling inward, squeezing the space. The ceiling lowered by a few inches. The temperature plunged. My hands shook uncontrollably. I took a step backward. The creature mirrored me with a forward lurch. I stepped to the side. It twisted its torso unnaturally, as if to block all routes but the door. A faint whisper moved through the hallway air. Not words, not breath, just a soft, urging vibration. The building wanted me through that door. The entity wanted me through that door. I did not know what waited beyond it. It could be escape. It could be death. It could be something far worse. But I knew one thing. Staying in the third hallway meant dying here. I stepped forward. The creature shifted. Its limbs curled inward in a slow, anticipatory motion. Its faceless head tilted downward toward me. My pulse roared in my ears. I walked. Faster, then faster. The creature began to move, its long fingers dragging along the walls, as if feeling the vibrations I left behind. The hallway squeezed tighter. The lights flickered. The temperature dropped again. I ran. My legs carried me through the narrowing space. The creature's silhouette stretched across the floor. Its limbs lengthened unnaturally. It moved faster, fast enough to blur. The door glowed faintly. A cold white outline. A promise, a threat, an escape. I lunged forward just as the creature's arm extended along the wall, reaching for my shadow. Its fingers grazed the floor behind me. The door opened without a handle. Without a sound, I dove through it. The hallway vanished behind me. The lights disappeared. The creature's shape melted into darkness, and the door closed. When the door slammed shut behind me, the sound did not echo. It vanished into the air as if the space absorbed it completely. I collapsed forward onto a cold surface that felt smoother than concrete but harder than metal. My hands pressed against it, trying to steady myself. The darkness around me was total, not dim, not shadowed, complete. I took a slow breath. The air tasted different, not dusty like the facility, not cold like the hallways. Just empty. There was no smell. No vibration, no hum from the vents, no groaning in the walls. For the first time since arriving at the building, the place around me felt dead. My flashlight flickered when I tried turning it on. The beam sputtered weakly, then pushed out a thin, pale cone of light. It illuminated nothing but a flat, grey floor stretching into the darkness. No walls, no ceiling, just a featureless space. I stood up slowly. My voice would not leave my throat. Even breathing felt difficult. I waved the flashlight around, searching for edges, boundaries, anything. My light touched nothing. Either the space was too large, or something swallowed the walls. I took a cautious step forward. My footsteps created no sound. The floor did not echo. My shoes made contact, but the impact never returned to my ears. Another step, another silence. The emptiness pressed in from every direction. Then I felt something shift in the distance. Not a sound, not a vision, a presence. My body reacted before my mind could process it. Every instinct screamed at me that I was not alone. Something else existed in this blank space. Something huge, something still. I turned the flashlight toward the sensation. The beam reached farther than it should have. A faint shape sat at the far end of the space, a silhouette suspended high in the air. At first, it looked like a doorway, a tall frame glowing faintly with pale light around its edges. The glow pulsed gently, the same slow rhythm I felt in the third hallway, the same pattern I had learned to fear. Behind the faint light, a large shadow stretched upward, taller than anything I had seen in the facility. Its outline flickered as if not fully formed, not solid, not grounded in this space. My grip tightened on the flashlight. The glow pulsed again. This time, the shadow behind it moved. The movement was slow, like a giant shifting its weight in the dark. My heartbeat stuttered. My breath froze halfway in my chest. I remembered the notes in the files. The entity is not one thing. It is the building, the walls, the shadows, the vents, the places where light bends without reason. And now I understood something I had feared since breaking Rule 4. It had followed me, not through the door, through me. My reflection had marked me. The entity had learned my shape. The door had not been created as escape. It had been created to bring me somewhere the building wanted. The glow from the frame brightened for a moment, then dimmed again. Inviting, demanding, pulling. I took a step back. The floor softened beneath my heel, then hardened again. The space was shifting. I turned quickly, but the darkness behind me pressed close. The flashlight beam reached only a few feet before dissolving into black. There was no path, no exit, no doorway to run to, only the glowing frame ahead. I stepped forward without meaning to. The space around me pulsed. A single long thrum vibrated through the floor, traveling into my legs. The shadow near the glowing door shifted again. This time I heard it. A faint scrape. Sharp, metallic, dragging. I froze. The scrape continued for a few seconds, then stopped abruptly. The shadow behind the frame leaned forward slightly. The movement was slow but deliberate. It saw me. I felt it more than I understood it. A pressure on my chest, a weight behind my eyes, a pull in my spine. The thing behind the door was watching, waiting, learning. I walked forward. One slow step, then another. The glow brightened again as if reacting to my approach. The shadow behind it grew sharper. The edges of its limbs looked wrong, too long, too thin. They flickered between shapes like it was choosing one, choosing a form, choosing a body. My breath trembled. The files had warned something important. Once marked, the guard becomes a target for mimicry. The entity picks apart your shape, your movement, your rhythm, until it knows you better than you know yourself. It was preparing. I reached the halfway point of the space. The glow shone brighter, illuminating thin cracks on the floor near the door. The cracks pulsed faintly with each flicker. A low vibration moved through the space. Not from beneath me, not from the walls, from behind me. I spun around. Something massive loomed in the darkness, tall, silent, half-formed. The air bent around it. I stumbled backward, heading toward the only visible light. The entity behind me shifted with a smooth ripple. Its limbs flowed like liquid shadow. The shape bent inward, a neck elongated, a body stretched. The door was not an exit. It was a lure, a trap, a threshold, and the entity wanted me to cross it. I turned back to the glowing frame. The door pulsed again. The crack in the floor widened with a small pop, revealing deeper light beneath it. The air grew warmer. A faint whisper passed through my ears. Not words, a feeling. Come closer. I stepped backward as the two shadows behind the glow began to merge. The door's light bent inward toward the center, stretching into a thin vortex of white. The entity was pulling everything together. The darkness behind me surged forward. I ran. The light from the door grew blinding. The air sharpened. The floor tilted. I reached the glowing frame and felt a force pulling at my chest. Not pushing, pulling, like gravity had shifted in a direction that did not exist. My hands touched the frame. The glow burned cold. The shadow behind it leaned forward. A long arm slid from the darkness, reaching. Its fingers were too many, too long, too thin. The entity was choosing its form, choosing what I would see in its new body. My vision blurred. The space trembled. My breath stopped. The door pulled harder. I did not know what it led to. I did not know if it was part of the building or something beyond it. But behind me, something enormous approached. The air around it bent and warped. My reflection's whisper echoed faintly in my mind. It is coming. I stepped through the glowing frame. The world snapped. Light dissolved. The floor vanished, and everything went dark. Everything vanished the moment I stepped through the frame. The floor, the cold, the pulsing walls, the presence behind me. The sensation felt less like falling and more like being erased. My body dissolved into weightlessness. My breath disappeared. My thoughts scattered. A pressure tightened around my ribs as if the space was compressing me into a thin line. Then everything snapped back. A jolt shot through my body. My feet hit solid ground. My lungs filled with air so sharp it hurt. I stumbled forward and collapsed onto rough asphalt. Asphalt, not concrete, not tile, not the cold floor of the facility. The night air hit me like a slap. Warm, real, carrying the smell of damp earth and distant. Traffic. I was outside. The facility stood several feet, away, silent, unmoving, almost ordinary in the dark. No pulsing lights, no bending walls, no living shadows, just a quiet building under a night sky. I crawled backward on my hands, struggling to breathe. My vision blurred. My limbs shook with leftover terror. I stared at the structure, waiting for the walls to stretch, or the vents to shake, or a silhouette to appear in the windows. Nothing happened. The building looked dead. I did not trust it, and I did not trust the door behind me. I looked back. The glowing frame was gone. No door, no light, just the empty parking lot. My heart hammered violently. I tried to stand. My legs buckled. I leaned on a light pole and steadied myself. It was almost dawn. The horizon wore a pale bluish glow. Birds chirped somewhere in the trees. Normal sounds. I had forgotten what normal sounded like. I forced myself to walk toward my car. Each step felt like wading through water. My body ached. My lungs burned. My head buzzed with the memory of what I saw behind the door. When I reached my car, I fumbled with the keys. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I unlocked the door, slid inside, and shut the door quickly. Silence. Real silence. I started the engine, and the low rumble nearly made me cry from relief. I drove away from the facility without looking in the rearview mirror. I did not want to see if something stood behind the building, or on the roof, or in the shadows. 30 minutes later, I pulled into the parking lot of my apartment. The sun was climbing the edge of the sky. The world felt warm again, human again. I should have felt safe, but I did not. Inside my apartment, the air felt wrong. Too still, too quiet. I locked the door behind me and dropped onto the couch. My hands tingled. My legs were numb. My mind replayed the door, the silhouette, the shifting shadows. I still had the single page from the file, the one that said once marked, the guard cannot be unmarked. The entity will follow. I stared at those words for a long time. Something inside me knew the truth. The facility did not want me to escape. It wanted me to lead something out. I stayed awake until the afternoon, paranoid and shaking. Every creak in the walls made me sit upright. Every shadow in the corner of the room made my breath catch. I kept checking the window to see if something stood outside. Nothing happened. By evening, exhaustion forced me to rest. I lay on my bed fully dressed, staring at the ceiling. At some point, I drifted off. I woke to a soft tapping. 3 taps, light, measured, from inside the apartment. My eyes snapped open. I sat up slowly. The tapping came again. From the hallway outside my bedroom. Tap, tap, tap. My chest tightened. I stood carefully and stepped out of the bedroom. The hallway light flickered once. My breath fogged for a split second, then cleared. My reflection in the mirror at the end of the hall watched me. Not stood, not posed, watched. Its body carried the same posture as me, but its head tilted a second too slow. Its breathing did not match mine. Its expression hovered between fear and hunger. I froze. The mirror fogged, faintly, as if a warm breath touched the glass. From the other side, I did not move. My reflection moved its hand slowly, deliberately. It pressed its palm against the inside of the mirror. My lungs collapsed inward. Then the hallway lights flickered, harder. The mirror surface shimmered faintly. The same shimmer from the third hallway. The same ripple from the door. The same presence. Something pressed against the other side of the glass. Long fingers, thin joints, pale skin. My reflection stepped backward. Something else stepped forward. Its shape distorted mine, stretched my limbs, bent my shoulders. It was not copying me. It was replacing me. I stumbled backward, hitting the wall. The tapping began again, but this time it came from behind the mirror. Faster, harder, more desperate. The surface of the glass bulged outward slightly, as if something wanted to push through. I grabbed the doorknob to my room, ready to retreat, ready to barricade myself inside. Before I could close the door, the lights went out. Darkness swallowed everything. The breathing behind the mirror stopped. The tapping ceased. Silence. Then someone whispered my name from the center of the hallway. Not my reflection, not the building's mimicry, not the vents. A whisper made of cold air, a voice stretched thin, a sound too close to be human. I held my breath. The whisper came again. This time, from directly behind me, I turned slowly. There was nothing but darkness and faint cold air brushing across my face. The mirror behind me cracked, a thin fracture, a single line, running from the top corner to the center. Something had left the facility with me, not a creature, not a shadow, not a reflection. The building itself. The rules had not kept me alive. They had taught me obedience, predictability, weakness. And now the entity knew every breath I took, every movement, every fear, every mistake. I backed slowly into my room and closed the door. I pressed my ear against the wood. Silence. My chest tightened. I understood something with perfect clarity. The facility had been its cage. I had been its opening. And the knocking I now heard faintly inside the walls of my apartment told me exactly what the final rule should have been. Do not survive the night shift, because if you survive, it will follow you home.